Standards Bill, second reading.
Point of order, Chloe Swarbrick.
Chair, I seek leave for the order of the day for the second reading of the Regulatory Standards Bill to be discharged.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objections? Yes. Leave denied. Okay. The Honourable David Seymour.
Mr Speaker, I present a legislative statement on the Regulatory Standards Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Regulatory Standards Bill be now read a second time. This bill is a crucial piece of legislation for improving the long-term quality of regulation in our country and ultimately allowing New Zealanders to live longer, happier, healthier and wealthier lives. In a nutshell, if red tape and regulation are holding New Zealanders back because politicians find it politically rewarding to tie them in red tape, then we need to make regulating less rewarding for politicians by putting more sunlight on their activities. And that is how the Regulatory Standards Bill will help New Zealand get its mojo back. This bill turns the explanation from politicians passing laws that restrict our freedoms from because we said so into because here is the justification according to a set of principles. And to the rest of the colleagues across the House, if you want to tax someone, if you want to take or impair their property, if you want to restrict their livelihood, well, you can still do it. But you'll face tough questions about the impacts that those actions have on people's property rights, their freedom, and the compliance of your proposal with the rule of law. It does this by introducing principles of responsible regulation into primary legislation with a focus on good lawmaking processes and the effect of lawmaking on existing interests and liberties. When making legislation, agencies and lawmakers will have to consider the principles and be transparent about those considerations. Agencies will need to confirm that the legislation and its process for developing it has been reviewed for consistency with the principles and summarise any inconsistencies with those principles. That work will need to be published, and where an inconsistency is identified, the responsible minister or the maker of any secondary legislation will need to explain the reasons why. And let's put that into perspective by considering some issues that matter to Kiwis and how the Regulatory Standards Bill helps us avoid such mistakes. Earthquake regulations, recently repealed and not a day too soon, have cost Kiwis billions. Saving $8.2 billion is what will occur when we remove these earthquake standards. But too many people have suffered, have their livelihoods taken away because a parliament and a group of politicians decided that being seen to do the right thing at a moment in time was more important than the underlying rights of New Zealanders. The warnings were there. I voted against that legislation myself. But nobody took the warnings seriously enough, and it was only 9 years and billions of dollars later that we are able to start putting those valuable resources into things like car crashes and cancers that sadly kill so many more Kiwis.
God, this speech is going to kill me.
I want to touch on one change that's been made to one of the principles of good regulation that's been particularly topical. The takings principle.
I just want it to be over with.
That principle provides that legislation should not take or impair property without the consent of the owner unless there's good justification and fair compensation is provided. The inclusion of impairment is essential to the intent of the bill, which is to focus attention on the impact of legislation on existing interests and liberties as well as good lawmaking processes. When the government is considering passing legislation that impairs property rights, the nature and extent of that impairment should be made clear and relief should be considered. However, the committee's change clarifies the principle is intended to address situations where there is a high degree of impairment, not simply any impairment, and therefore a reference to quite severe impairment has been added, which means the principle will not be engaged when there is not a severe level of impairment. The bill does not require any action to be taken or compensation to be paid. The responsible minister can provide a statement of reasons why they consider a severe impairment to be justified and, if not paying compensation, the reasons for that position. However, the point is this principle will make it easier for Parliament and the public to see where property rights are being severely impaired, with the intent of helping reduce instances where impaired property rights without compensation lead to New Zealanders being so much poorer. I look forward to the committee of the whole stage. We can talk about the specifics of this bill in further detail. Overall, I'm proud to be responsible for a piece of legislation that discipline and transparency for New Zealand's lawmaking processes. This bill, when enforced, is going to support the people of New Zealand by ensuring them that serious consideration has been given to legislation that impacts on their lives and livelihoods. And if we're asking New Zealanders to comply with regulations in everyday life, then it's only reasonable to ensure that they're clear, consistent and meet a certain standard. When they do not meet that standard, the public rightfully expects lawmakers to be transparent about that fact. The passing of the Regulatory Standards Bill in later stages will take us a step closer to a more principled, transparent and accountable process for making legislation in New Zealand. It will help build confidence in the legislative process, support better outcomes for New Zealanders and ensure that our regulatory system is fit for purpose in the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, I've been very interested to see how easily people have mischaracterised this bill in the debates that has ensued. And I would like to
That's
touch
the
on
point.
two changes that I think, or two objections that I think are misguided. One has been the repeated assertion that somehow the Regulatory Standards Bill imposes restrictions on Parliament and therefore is undemocratic.
All right,
The law
slow
is
back
crystal
down to
clear. It's there in black and
1.25.
white. The purpose of this law is to promote accountability and transparency
There you
to
go.
the Parliament by the Executive. This enables our democracy. It enables greater transparency. And building on that misconception has been another widely shared in the public domain, that somehow the principles are inadequate because they don't include all of the objectives that the government might have. A government might wish to uphold the Treaty of Waitangi, it might wish to pursue goals around equity or public health or the environmental protection. But the fact that those are not included as principles reflects the fact that every initiative brought to this House and every regulation made by a government is already assumed to have a public purpose. It is already assumed to have a purpose like one of the ones that I listed. The purpose of this bill is to enable and make transparent the governments of the day to be able to show the public and the public to be able to see where that collective purpose and the pursuit of it is impairing the rights of ordinary people. So it's not a surprise that it doesn't include collective goals. The purpose of the law is to show when ordinary people's rights are being impaired. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Finance and Expenditure Committee for its very efficient consideration of the bill. I would like to also acknowledge the changes that they have made to the Regulatory Standards Board, in my view strengthening the bill by enhancing its independence, by saying that it will be reinforced by the Governor-General rather than the Minister for Regulation. I believe that that is going to make the Regulatory Standards Bill a much more august body with more authority, and it will allow that board to further raise the quality of the regulatory, the consistency accountability statements. Mr. Speaker, without further ado, I thank everybody for listening, and I commend this bill to the House.
The question.
Oh, thank fuck, that's over.
Yeah, I love what Kiwi Skirt has just sat there and put out there with the lovely icon on the end.
It's policy wonkery. That's what the kids call it. It's just, he was just saying the same thing over and over and over again on repeat. So, for those that don't know what a regulatory standards bill is, let me explain it very simply, right? And I'm going to be a bit more engaging than Seymour. Imagine the government wants to create a new law. Well, this bill sets up a mandatory quality check system to make it harder for the government to pass laws that affect private property and business freedoms. So basically, the quality check, this is how it's going to work. A new checklist. The government creates an official checklist of principles of responsible regulation, which the most important parts are property rights. So basically, the government can't seriously reduce your property's value without a very good reason, and usually without paying you for it. So, you know, most of the time they can't break your shit, but sometimes they can, and they don't have to compensate you for it, right? They can't, you know, drastically reduce your property's value. 9 times out of 10, they've got to pay you for that damage. But, you know, sometimes they can't be bothered. Individual freedom. Laws cannot limit your freedom more than what is absolutely necessary. I don't think there's anyone in this country that disagrees with that idea. Cost versus benefit, a new law must do more good than harm. Well, at the moment, this bill is doing more good than harm, especially to my brain. Clarity. Laws must be easy to understand. Well, how easy did everyone find his speech and his explanation of that bill easy to understand? I didn't.
I was none of the wiser.
Yeah. Well, so it's going to do that by... So the way how it's going to do this, how it's going to enforce all this, is by forced report cards. So for every new major law, the government must fill out a private report card, grading itself against the checklist. If the law breaks any checklist rules, the minister has to explain to the public why they are doing it anyway, right?
Isn't that what regulatory impact statements for?
Yes, that's what it's for, but apparently it's not restrictive enough. But yeah, it's like with Judith Collins. She's like, oh yeah, this bill's going to violate human rights, but we're doing it anyways. So that's cool. That's nice. And this bill will set up a new watchdog group, a new independent group, the Regulatory Standards Board, and its job is to read government report cards and give its own opinion to Parliament, investigate complaints from the public about existing government regulations, but, this is one of the amendments that's just been put in, but is not allowed to investigate existing acts of Parliament.
Oh.
Yeah. So, now let's get to the more important stuff, right? How's this bill going to impact you? Right, everyday folks. So here's the good, as argued by supporters. They say that supporters say that it will hopefully this bill will lead to laws that are less complicated and annoying for you to deal with, and that there'll be more transparency. So basically, you'll be able to see the government's own assessment of a new law and its reasons for overriding the good law checklist. Protection from overreach. It will make it harder for the government to restrict your freedoms or reduce your property's value without a compelling public reason. So it's like, oh, well, I want your stuff, but, here's a good reason. I've got a national interest. I'm going to put this big, fat, chunky mine here, right? It's in the interest of the public to put the new mine shaft in here, right?
I wonder so would that mean that if your property value decreases, such as Mr. Christopher and Mrs. Amanda Luxon on a property on Great Barrier Island that reduced from 10.2 million to 7, could they ask for $300,000 compensation? No, was it $3 million compensation from the government?
Potentially, if it's the result of a government action.
Which, quite ironically, the government valuation was done just recently, dropped, was at the request of the owner to avoid $8,000 a year in rates.
Oh, well, there you go. And here's the final point that supporters are really excited about. A new complaints channel. You get a new official way to complain about government regulations through the board. Woo!
Let's fill up with beneficiaries complaining about the processes with wins.
True. That's actually a really good idea. Let's do that.
Yeah. Put it this way. You get wrongly sanctioned. You sit down there and you sit there. Maybe you rightly get sanctioned.
Yeah.
Just say you got sanctioned, so you complain to the Regulatory Standards Board.
Yeah. There you go. Why not? I can't see anything going wrong with that.
Actually, here's a great one. Could food grant cards that restrict you from being able to purchase alcohol or tobacco, could that be breach? Could that be taken as a complaint to the Ministry of Regulation?
Well, I mean, only really if the corporation is impacted severely, potentially.
Well, I was going to say, what's the name called? The supermarkets that sell the products?
Yeah, I mean, if the supermarket's main clientele base is people on the benefits buying tobacco and alcohol, then potentially. So let's talk about the bad part of this bill. So slower government. So it's actually going to slow down the government. The new paperwork and justification steps could slow down the government's ability to respond quickly to a crisis like a pandemic or a natural disaster. Yay! Chilling effect on protections. The government might become hesitant to pass new laws that protect the public if those laws harm business or property interests. Here's an example. Rules to stop water pollution could be harder to pass if they might severely impair a farm's value. There you go. You got nitrogen, you got phosphorus in the water, you got a farmer that's dumping stuff. Too bad.
Even if it affects the farmer down the stream who doesn't want that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there you go. The farmers will just have to duke it out for each other, old-fashioned style. Public health. Laws restricting tobacco advertising could face huge hurdles for interfering with business freedom. So, there you go.
Well, considering Chloe Swarbrick has said there is one to push to remove alcohol advertising in the same context as tobacco advertising.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's interfering with, alcohol manufacturing companies.
No more seeing the the TUI ads about the girls at the brewery.
True.
You remember those ads from when we were much younger?
I do.
Yeah. When they got rid of men working at the brewery, they suddenly stopped drinking on the job.
Yeah. Can we get a carve out specifically for TUI ads? That'd be great. Okay. So. And then we go over the costs of implementing this board. All the extra reports are going to cost taxpayers millions of dollars. So we're not saving any money doing this. And then we've got the really ugly shit, okay? The checklist is incomplete. The official checklist leaves out other vital principles like the Treaty of Waitangi. There's no principle in the bill for the Treaty of Waitangi. Human rights and environmental protection. This means a law could be called high quality by the Regulatory Standards Bill even if it harms the environment or fails Māori, because those factors aren't on the checklist it uses. And
any provisions with the Bill of Rights Act of 1993?
No. There's no principles there. There's no principle there. I've looked through the bill. Let's have a look. I've got my notes here. Let's have a look. Rule of law, liberties, taking property, taxes, fees, levies. role of courts and good lawmaking. So nowhere does it say human rights under the principles. It doesn't even address our international obligations. So yeah, basically, this bill's going to tilt the playing field. The bill systemically prioritizes private property rights, not public. I wish it did. Prioritizes private property rights and economic interests over other public goods like community well-being, health, and clean environment. So he's talking about, when Seymour was talking really fast there for a hot minute. He was saying, "Oh, we don't care about the collective good, or we're not going to prioritize that because this is about individual rights." Well, here's the thing. When you've got stuff like an environmental disaster, like that big cyclone, Gabrielle, Gabrielle that flew on through, right? You now got hazards that impact the collective well-being of community. When you've got lack of healthcare services, that impacts a community. When you've got corporations putting like forever chemicals in the water, that impacts the wider community. So you can't just look at individuals. You also have to look at whole communities.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a libertarian socialist, I'm out here saying you cannot have equality without equity, and that forces you to look at wider communities as well and how legislation will impact them. But also, the other thing too is that, did you know that 98.7% of people and organizations that submitted their views on this bill were opposed to it?
That doesn't surprise me. Well, actually, I kind of knew that, but maybe our audience didn't.
Yeah, that's right. I just thought I'd put that in there. It's like, the majority of people that submitted on this, the vast majority, don't want it. So that's nice. So not to mention, this bill didn't even follow its own standards. When it was being developed, it used a rushed process. It used urgency. It used all this other crap to get it done.
Select committee times, I think, would be the best word, because this bill hasn't actually gone under any urgency provisions yet.
Oh, it hasn't gone under any urgency. Well,
the government's given up doing urgency because of the fact that every time you go into urgency, you can't run select committees.
Oh, well, whatever you call it.
So they're using the other provision called extended sitting times.
Oh, well, there you go.
Which is basically the friendlier version of urgency.
Yeah. But here's pretty much the bottom line, the summary of this bill. If you're a right-wing libertarian, and you believe the government has become too intrusive and needs a strict system to protect individual property rights, you'll like this bill. If you're everyone else, you'll believe that the government needs to act decisively to protect the environment, public health, and social well-being. If you're in that camp, like I am, you're going to see this bill as a dangerous obstacle that favors private interests over the public good. So, thanks, Seymour. I hate it.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, the Order Paper Podcast.